association with the discovery of a human ancestor, and it just seemed so easy. So I thought, okay, this is for me. I'm going to keep doing this. When that little bit of rock was taken off, this was the specimen that we had, and this is one of the most well-known of the early skulls that we found on the east side of the lake. So that was in 1969, and as I said, that was my first experience. We were camped at a place called Kubifora, and when we realized that this was going to be a very long-term project, we put up a little base camp, and so every year we built new buildings. The first year we used to come back from the field with all these slabs of stone in the back of the car, and we made a stone floor on the sand, and then we put thatched roofs and tin huts and then stone, and gradually the camp grew up, and it's now run by the National Museum. It's a still ongoing base camp. We've subsequently moved north, but this was a very, very magical place, and it was a great place to base it. It was sort of in the middle of the whole area, so you could go in any direction, and the fossil sites all around. We had a great team of young people, and they were doing geology and geophysics and paleontology, archaeology, all sorts of different disciplines. And this sort of work really depends on a multidisciplinary approach. You can't do this sort of thing on your own. The geology on its own was an amazingly difficult problem, because it's such a huge area. The places where we were working were separated by bush, so you couldn't always trace geological horizons from one to the other. And so everyone was, it was just a brand new place. Nobody had been there before. The fossils we were finding were new, and so everything was really exciting. And this group of people we had was so enthusiastic. So it was a really amazing time to be there. And the evening discussions on what people thought and what they found and how they interpreted their results were always very lively and exciting. And that's really how science proceeds, is with this constant interaction with people in other disciplines. So again, just to put you on the map, Kenya is there, and it's situated with the Rift Valley running through the middle, and it's because of the Rift Valley that Kenya has so many fossil sites. Lake Turkana is, as I said, a huge area. The lake is 230 kilometers long. It's about 40 kilometers wide. And there are sedimentary exposures all the way up the east shore and down the west shore and to the north in Ethiopia. So it's one major lake basin that has over time accumulated a lot of sedimentary deposits and fossils. And it goes back as far as over 60 million years. There are deposits of the late Oligocene, Miocene, Pliocene, Pleistocene, right up to the last 10,000 years in the Holocene. So it's a very long record, and the best represented is the last 6 million years, which of course is when humanity evolved. The fossils that we're finding are just extremely well preserved. This is an elephant skeleton. You can probably see its tusks, ribs, feet, head, skulls at the bottom there, and the mandible. It's such a huge thing, this, that we decided to leave it in the field. And so today it's an exhibit for the public to see how things can be exposed through excavation. So we just left it there as a field exhibit. So what we were really trying to do was to reconstruct all these animals that we were finding, reconstruct their evolution, and reconstruct the habitats that our ancestors were living in, and the animals that they were living alongside. So this is just gives you an idea of what the area was looking like 2.5 million years ago. As you see, things are, you can recognize what they are, but they're not really like things you see today. The saber-toothed cat there, and the elephants are like the Asian elephants, those particular ones. So we're both elephants related to Asian and African elephants around. So they're familiar, but not the same. In 1972 was when my first child was born, and that year we made a really exciting discovery, and a skull that, for me, it came in many, many fragments and many pieces, and I had the job of putting all these pieces together. Initially Richard tried, and he just couldn't do it, so he finally gave up and let me do it, which I was really excited about, because I was itching to get my hands on it, as you see. And this is Louise, aged 3 or 4 months, maybe a little older actually, 72. She was born in March, and that must have been in July or August. And she's already interested, isn't she? So gradually, the site that we had found this specimen was some way from the camp, and the field crew was screening the surface, trying to find more pieces. And so every day there were more pieces of this jigsaw puzzle coming in, and I would fit them together, and then, the annoying little bits were missing, and the next day some more pieces would come. And gradually it came together. I had a lot of problem putting a face on it, but it was a really exciting time. It took about 6 weeks, and at the end of it, we had this fantastic specimen here, which was interesting because it has a big skull. The brain is obviously large, much larger than those other ones, and even to this day, we're not quite sure how this fits with everything else. So I think this is maybe still one of the more controversial skulls, and we're still trying to find something that will tell us where everything, how everything relates with this one. Through the 68 to 1980, we found an amazing number of very complete skulls. It's always puzzled me because the human skulls there's so many and they're so complete, but I think it's because most of the fossils we find have been chewed by carnivores. So just as on the landscape today, in wildlife areas, carnivores tend to eat up all the evidence of any animal living there. And I think that the carnivores couldn't actually get their jaws around the human skull. And so we didn't find so many postcranial bones, but we did find these skulls. And we still did, I think, because there was no carnivore that could actually break up the skull with its teeth, which was lucky, actually. In 1981, we moved over to the west side of the lake, and we started looking there, and again it was the same sequence of exposures, and also very extensive. And we started looking in 80-81, working down the side of the west side of the lake, and looking for more evidence. What we were finding was that it was very frustrating because we were finding these isolated limb bones, but not skeletons. And if you don't have a skeleton, you can't really work out the relative brain size. And what we wanted to know, because increased brain size is a significant evolutionary adaptation in human evolution. But you need to have skeleton in order to work out how big the brain is relative to a skeleton. So if you had a small-brained fossil, maybe it had a small brain, it had a small skeleton, and therefore was actually bigger brain than it appeared. So these are the sort of sizes of the skulls we were getting. So we could say how big the brain was, but we couldn't say how big it was relative to the body. And so the skeleton was the sort of dream thing that we were all looking for, and actually never really believed we'd get. But then one day in 1984, Kamaya Kimal, he worked with Richard's parents, Goldfly, and he worked with Richard for many years, and then he subsequently worked with me. He was on a Sunday walk one day. And it's rather annoying when you're looking for fossils, you can't help looking for fossils even when you're trying to go for a walk and look at birds and bees. And so Kamaya did his thing and was looking for fossils, and he picked up this tiny little skull fragment that you can see in his hand. And it's literally no bigger than a matchbox. And this skull fragment led to the normal screening of the surface. And during the screening, we began to get more pieces of the skull. And then we started excavating, and the excavation produced more pieces of the skull, and then the whole skull. And then, with the bigger excavation, we started getting parts of the skeleton. And we really couldn't believe it, because this is what we really needed. And as we excavated more and more, you were getting more and more of the limb bones. You can see the mandible there, as well as the leg bones. It ended up with a really huge excavation. This was sort of halfway through it at the bottom there, and a massive screening that we did. The school kids from their oncology at the time, we used to come and they always wanted to help us, and so they would build wheelbarrows and things. And a number of those school kids are now still working for us as adults, and they finish their schooling, which is nice. The one thing we really wanted to know was that what was the body proportion of Homo erectus? Because we knew from the skull that it was a Homo erectus specimen. This is a very old picture that was drawn in 1933 by a famous anatomist. And what he did was made an orangutan, a chimpanzee, and a gorilla stand up so that you can see the body proportions. And you can see relative to a human that the 8 limbs have short legs and long arms, whereas a human has much longer legs. And when we reconstructed the Turkana boy, the skeleton that we had done, here it had modern human body proportions with long legs and long arms. So that was interesting because that meant that everything the skeleton was looking very modern, but still the skull wasn't really as big as a modern human skull relative to the body. So the brain capacity is halfway to being human, but not fully human. And everything else that we looked at in this skeleton was almost human, but not quite, which indicates that Homo erectus is very much on the threshold of being human, but not really human. One of the things we were looking at from this skeleton also was life history. And the life history difference between an ape and a human is interesting in that humans have a much longer childhood. They have extended childhood during which they learn a lot. The adult lifespan is pretty much similar to ape, but then humans also have an extended longevity after the females have stopped breeding. So there's a difference there. And looking at the life history you can study the dental eruption patterns through the microstructure of teeth, and looking at the Turkana boy, we call the skeleton the Turkana boy's teeth, you could figure out the development history and see that again, it wasn't quite human, but it also was not ape at all. So it was halfway to being human. The boy is interesting because it was the deciduous canines were still in place. So the adult canines were just coming through in the crypt. And so from that we could estimate that it was equivalent to a modern human of about 11 or 12 years old. Louise, our eldest daughter at the time, was exactly that age, and her canines were just about to fall out. And we used to ask all her friends, can you see your teeth? And they were all the 11 and 12-year-olds had their canines, lower canines in, adult, but upper canines not quite in. So it was equivalent to a modern human at that age, but it would have been equivalent because it didn't develop the same way. Would be equivalent to a 7 or 8 year old, actually, in actual years. So the interesting thing about Homo erectus is that it's the first human ancestor to be found outside of Africa. 1.8 million years ago, Homo erectus is known outside Africa at a place called Dmanisi in Georgia. Until that time, all of human evolution is found in Africa and not outside Africa. So humans evolved in Africa. Human ancestry is African. And I think now there's no doubt about that, and it's accepted pretty universally. So from that migration, Homo erectus is known from China, Java, Indonesia, and other places. In 1989, Richard took on the leadership of the Wildlife Service in Kenya. There was a lot of poaching going on, and and the elephants were being approached in horrendous numbers. And he was asked by the president if he would revamp the Wildlife Society, the Wildlife Service, and reduce the poaching. So the first thing he did was to bring world attention to the plight of the elephants by burning this huge pile of confiscated ivory that Kenya was about to sell. It was worth a lot of money in terms of the price of ivory at the time, but Richard wanted to show that ivory wasn't actually valuable and it shouldn't be bought. And this was one of the first things he did when he took over that job, and it really did cut the poaching out. Unfortunately, it's now come back again, and it's another very serious issue in Kenya. So when Richard went off to wildlife, I then was in the great position of being able to lead the expedition, and I had a choice of what site, what age site, and what stage of human evolution I want to study. And so I decided that the most interesting time at that point was the very early time when human lineage split from the ape lineage. And it was known to be about between 5 and 7 billion years. But the earliest biped at that time was Lucy from Ethiopia, which is dated at about 3 million years. We knew from the skulls that we had found and others had found that human evolutionists, with these major adaptations appearing in the record, the bipedality was the initial adaptation that led to everything else. So it was the thing that gave the potential for everything else. Once humans stood up on 2 legs, they then had their hands free. They didn't have to walk on their hands and have hands adapted for locomotion. And so they developed a very flexible, manually dexterous hand, which could then make tools. Making tools meant that you could eat, that they could eat meat. Eating meat meant that they started hunting, and then they developed the modern body plan. And from that, they were able to evolve a big brain that is so typical of us and has led us to be where we are today. So bipedality was the first adaptation. And for me, I thought it'd be really interesting to find out if we could extend it back earlier than Lucy. This is the skeleton of a species called Australopithecus afarensis, and the popular name given to this skeleton, which was found by John Johansson in Ethiopia, is Lucy. The scientific name is Australopithecus afarensis. The reconstruction of Lucy based on that skeleton shows, again, rather long limbs, quite short legs, and a sort of rather ape-like body, but walking bipedally. And the reason, again, that we know, not just from the skeleton of Lucy, but also Meave Leakey in 1976 uncovered this long trail of footprints